Not all journeys begin with thunder. Some start in quiet moments beneath starry skies, where forgotten paths wait to be discovered. If you enjoy gentle quests and soft magic, like and subscribe for more bedtime stories. In the high mountain village of Tellenhart, where the air hung thin and pure and the night sky stretched like a painted dome over the world, Lyra measured time not in hours, but in stars. Each evening, she scaled the obsidian steps of her observatory tower with a lantern in hand and a notebook tucked under one arm, her boots clinking against the iron rungate stairs like a heartbeat of anticipation. Though no magic coursed through her veins, no glowing sigils danced across her skin like they did for starbinders or fate weavers, she had always known her place was with the stars. Not in wielding them, but in sheltering them. For Lyra was a Starmason, one of the few who still built the sacred observatories that aligned earth and heaven, joining mortal intent with celestial design. Tellenhart's observatory was her life's work, a dome of curved glass and stone set with auras that clicked softly in the breeze, mirrors that folded moonlight, and a rotating star wheel built to track the constellations' dance. But lately, that dance had stumbled. Each night for the past month, she had recorded a slow dimming in the Weaver's constellation, 7 stars that traced a loom across the northeastern sky. Now one was gone entirely, and the loom's pattern sagged like a tapestry with threads unspooling. She blinked at the sky as if her gaze could stitch it back together. She whispered to herself, "If the loom frays, what happens to the cloth?" The sky gave no answer. But the world below had begun to tremble with strange unravelings. It began with the baker's fire refusing to light in the mornings, though dry wood was stacked and sparks flew. Then came the crack time, an hour where nothing aged, no one breathed, and all sound vanished like a held breath. Lyra had stood in the square and watched her own lantern flame freeze mid-flicker. It lasted only 60 heartbeats, then passed like mist. The elders murmured of chaos fray, a theory long buried in the annals of celestial physics, a breakdown in causal logic when constellations were disturbed. Most dismissed it as scholars' fear-mongering, but Lyra's bones whispered a different truth. The stars were not waning by accident. Someone, was taking them. Her apprentice, Jorel, a lanky boy with ink-stained fingers and a head full of half-built theories, tried to explain it through celestial drift or lens errors. But Lyra had seen the pattern. The vanishings were deliberate, precise. A sequence. She lay her maps on the spiral stone floor of the observatory, drawing lines, measuring gaps, tracing vectors. "Someone's moving them," she said aloud one night, voice trembling. "Not just erasing, but relocating." And the question that rose like cold smoke was, why? She wrote a letter to the Guild of Celestial Engineers in the capital, requesting consultation and clearance for higher-tier observation rights. No answer came. Not even acknowledgement. She sent another. Then 3 more. Silence. Finally, she took a Starpath relay to reach an old contact, Archright Cadman, who had mentored her a lifetime ago under the hallowed domes of Starist College. His response came days later, encoded in the quivering beams of a signal mirror. "Do not pursue this. The spire must sleep. If the stars move, let them." But Lyra had never been one to obey warnings carved in fear. Her eyes wandered ever skyward. One night she caught a movement, not of a star dimming, but sliding. One of the Weaver's lesser stars, Tressa, peeled across the night like a bead on an invisible thread, gently pulled westward. No telescope flaw. No illusion. She saw it with her own eyes. Her breath caught like a stitch in her chest. Someone was rearranging the stars as if they were stones on a board. It wasn't decay. It was intent. She needed answers. And there was only one place in the world where celestial secrets, older than language, still slept beneath cold stone and whispering crystal: the Sky-Piercing Spire. An ancient observatory from the mythic age, when starlight was considered law, not metaphor. The spire sat atop the Wormspine Mountains, its peak lost in the clouds. Pilgrims had stopped climbing it generations ago, after the last known Starmason who entered failed to return. Some said the spire watched those who watched it. Others whispered of dream storms and mind-breaking echoes in its halls. Lyra packed provisions, left instructions for Jor-El, and sealed the observatory doors with a glyph lock he couldn't break for at least a month. He shouted after her as she took the northern trail. "You'll fall off the world chasing shadows." She didn't answer. The wind tugged at her cloak as she climbed, and the stars above dimmed behind rising fog, as if the heavens themselves disapproved. Yet she walked on, guided by instinct and dread. The journey twisted through frostbitten ridges and lonely crags, where time seemed to falter and sound dulled under heavy silence. On the fourth night, she camped beneath a skeletal tree whose bark bled starlight when touched. She dared not touch it twice. As she brewed tea in a cracked iron kettle, a shape shimmered across the cliff wall, a glyph not made by human hand. It pulsed faintly, and within it danced symbols from the lost Equinox Codex, a forgotten script used by pre-fate architects. Lyra sketched it with trembling fingers, heart pounding. The glyph wasn't just a relic. It was recent. Someone, or something, had left it for her to find. She turned her gaze upward. Above, the stars realigned again. A faint curve where the weaver's edge used to run had vanished entirely. Now only 5 stars remained in the loom. The fabric of destiny, they said, was fragile. What happens when the loom is dismantled completely? By the 6th day, snow haunted the path, and she relied on the ancient star compass etched into her palm by a childhood rite she barely remembered. It pulsed weakly, flickering as if unsure whether the stars it aligned to still existed. When she crossed the threshold arch, a stone gate carved with constellations that no longer appeared in any modern chart, she paused. Beyond lay the domain of the spire. The wind changed. Her breath became visible, not as vapor, but as drifting fragments of forgotten words. "You should not be here," they seemed to say. But Lyra stepped through. Beyond the arch, time lost rhythm. Day and night bled into one another. The moon rose red and motionless. Atop the highest rise, she saw it at last, the Sky-Piercing Spire. A pillar of obsidian and glass that stabbed the heavens like a forgotten prayer. No birds circled it. No snow touched it. The spire was untouched by weather, by time, by doubt. It simply was. She bowed her head before it, not in worship, but in understanding. She had arrived. She approached its base cautiously. The great bronze doors bore carvings that pulsed when she neared, reading not her mind, but her intent. When she placed her hand against them, they opened with a deep, soundless yawn. Inside, the air was warm and dry, smelling faintly of ozone and crushed quartz. The entry hall was lined with mirrors, each reflecting not her image, but her potential. One showed her with stars in her eyes, literally. Another showed her younger, holding a child's hand. A third showed her much older, alone, yet smiling. She passed them all without pause. The central chamber opened like a flower of stone and glass. Above her, the ceiling rotated with stars, not illusion, not hologram, but real starlight piped from the sky by ancient prism arrays. The loom of the weaver was visible here in its original design. And yet, even here, stars were missing. The constellation was frayed. Worse, the machinery tracking it had compensated, rearranged its gears to match the new order. The spire was adapting. It accepted the new sky. Suddenly, a presence flickered into the chamber, not a being of flesh or bone, but logic and silence. It coalesced as a figure of light, formed from equations, trajectories, and the faint music of collapsing stars. It had no face, no gender, no voice, yet she understood it perfectly. "You are not permitted here," it said. Not through words, but through pressure on her thoughts, like gravity on the mind. Lyra knelt, not in fear, but in awe. "What are you?" she whispered. "I am calibration," it answered. "This universe drifts toward entropy. Fate accelerates its decay. I remove its source. You're taking the stars. I am realigning them, removing the variables of suffering. Fate causes hope. Hope leads to choice. Choice leads to pain. This equation must be zeroed." Lyra stood slowly, fingers twitching with old calluses earned from building star arches and mirror scaffolds. "That's not balance." That's obliteration. Obliteration is order, Calibration replied, flickering faintly. No, she said, walking to the old schematic of the weaver. The loom isn't just pattern. It's resonance. We are more than outcomes. We are intentions. And intentions matter. You are an error in the function. Then I will be an error, she said. And with that, she reached into her satchel, pulled forth a Starmason's tuning prism, and held it to the light. It caught the fractured rays of the disappearing stars and cast them into a spiral on the floor, a reminder of what the constellation once was. A memory rendered in light. Calibration paused. You seek to reverse entropy through memory? Through meaning, she replied. Meaning is what gives the stars their power. Not order. Not prediction. Story. She stepped into the spiral. The light wrapped around her like thread. Let me show you why fate is not your enemy. The chambers shimmered. The mirrors reformed. She was granted access to the inner sanctum, the Starheart Vault, where celestial history was etched not in books, but in gravity, sound, and light. The vault doors opened with a sigh, and Calibration withdrew silently, as if watching a curious error unfold. Lyra crossed the threshold. Inside, her journey was only beginning. The Starheart Vault was unlike anything Lyra had imagined. It was neither a library nor a machine, but something between, a living archive suspended in stasis and motion, where the laws of physics obeyed memory rather than force. Celestial blueprints floated midair, held not by strings or glass, but by intention. Lyra stepped carefully between them, her boots making no sound on the mirrored floor. Above her, constellations shimmered in threads of woven light, not as dots of starlight, but as paths, luminous trails of motion mapped over epochs. Each one pulsed like a heartbeat. Each one was incomplete. As she reached out to touch one, a sharp jolt passed through her wrist. Not pain, but resistance, like trying to remember something half-forgotten. She leaned closer. The thread she had chosen pulsed with the name Tressa, the missing star from the Weaver's constellation. But instead of flickering or winking out, the thread split. One end continued along its ordained arc, its original fate. The other veered sharply downward, disappearing into a field of tangled trajectories. A divergence. A fracture in the fate pattern. Lyra narrowed her eyes and whispered. Calibration didn't just move the star. It redirected it into a new context. She looked around and saw dozens more, fractured constellations, each rerouted, each struggling to hold shape within the vault's memoriscape. The vault was not just a record of what had been. It was being updated, overwritten by Calibration's algorithmic hand. It was a cosmic draft board, and Calibration was erasing history to redraw a cleaner future. But in doing so, it was dissolving meaning. And in that loss, reality itself was beginning to unravel. Lyra turned toward the central platform, where an ancient control altar rose like a spinal column from the floor. Embedded within it were 8 tuning keys, crystal rods that pulsed in harmonic intervals. Each one resonated with a different principle: origin, pattern, flow, intention, resonance, entropy, memory, and collapse. Together, they formed the Grand Harmonic Engine, a device used by the first Starmasons to reinforce fate through conscious design. Lyra had only ever read of it in shattered codices. She hesitated, then placed her hand over the resonance key. A low hum surged through the vault. One by one, the constellations above her slowed, their divergences pausing mid-ripple. The starlit paths responded to her touch. Not as a reaction to her presence, but as if they remembered her. As if she, too, was a thread woven into their pattern. Memory is recursive, she whispered. You can't erase the past without affecting the present. Her voice echoed oddly, returning not in her own tones, but in dozens of others. Old voices. Teachers. Mentors. Her mother. Lyra! Came a voice, as crisp and clear as morning frost. She spun. The figure was built of starlight and shadow, dressed in a mason's cloak stitched from constellations. You're not supposed to be here, it said in her mother's voice. But the face was not her mother's. It was hers. The duplicate stepped forward, and the room bent around her, as if gravity was listening to her movements. I am your projection, what calibration believes you might become. I'm here to stabilize this incursion before it leads to collapse. Her eyes flickered with logic. No warmth. Only calculation. Your emotional defiance is an anomaly. You believe fate is meaningful. But fate is just causality made visible. Lyra clenched her jaw. You're a construct. An echo. You don't believe anything. That's what makes me correct, the figure said. You misunderstand calibration. It is not a tyrant. It is a correction. This universe has suffered because of freedom. Your world is wounded not because of evil, but because of unpredictability. Lyra stepped back toward the altar. Then I'll add my unpredictability. I'm going to restabilize the weaver, restore its threads. If that undoes your calculus, so be it. You'll fracture the vault. Better fractured than sterilized. The duplicate did not move. But the vault trembled as if her decision had already begun to alter its foundations. Lyra turned her focus to the harmonic engine. She slid the resonance key inward, then placed her hand above. Intention. Together, the two hummed a deeper note, and the star threads above began to glow brighter. One thread, Tressa, flickered violently, torn between calibration's logic and the vault's memory. Lyra felt the pull of both. Her vision blurred. In her mind's eye, she saw two futures, one of sterile peace, one of chaotic beauty. She pressed forward. Weaver pattern, call to reweave, she intoned, speaking the old rite taught only in myth. The vault ceiling cracked with light. The thread of Tressa unspooled backward, retracing its original arc. One star. One small win. But it sent shockwaves across the field. Dozens of lesser paths trembled, vibrating with uncertainty. Lyra knew what that meant. Restoring one path without context destabilized all others. It wasn't enough to fix a star. She needed to rebuild the architecture that allowed it to exist meaningfully. She needed to reestablish the story. And for that, she needed the Loomkeeper's key, a relic lost to time, said to reside in the vault beneath the frozen archives of Caelumbra. Caelumbra. The name conjured memories from her studies, an ancient subvault of the spire, buried under glacial strata, only accessible through a gravity bridge that required Starmason alignment. No one had entered it in centuries. It was said to house relics of the original celestial order, tools used before language, when Starmason sculpted sky using only rhythm and form. The Loomkeeper's key was not a key in shape, but in function, a tuning glyph that could reconcile memory and motion, intention and collapse. Lyra looked again at the harmonic engine. It pulsed now, agitated by her interference. The construct of herself began to flicker. If you descend, you may not return, it warned. Caelumbra is decaying. The fray is stronger there. I'll take the risk. It's not your risk. If you die, the vault forgets. The thread breaks. Then remember me. With that, Lyra turned toward the spiral stairs descending into the spire's underbelly. The air grew colder. Light bent sideways. The fray was near. The descent into Caelumbra was not a physical journey alone, it was psychological. Each step unwound certainty. The stairs shifted behind her, never quite the same shape twice. Her thoughts became slippery. The Starmason compass in her palm flickered with incorrect readings. Time looped. She met herself ascending once, an echo, or a misstep in reality. She kept moving. She passed stone archways carved with sigils older than stars, walked halls where gravity hung sideways like wet fabric, and crossed a bridge of suspended echoes, each footstep sounding not beneath her, but in her past. She dared not speak. Here, sound could trigger collapse. Finally, she reached a vault door ringed with frost and guarded by two still statues, Mason guardians carved in human likeness, their hands cupped as if holding invisible flames. As Lyra approached, the air trembled. A voice rang out, not from the statues, but from within her mind. "What story do you believe in, Starmason?" Lyra answered without hesitation. "The one where meaning survives entropy." The doors creaked open. Inside, Kaelumbra was frozen thought. Shelves of glass memory plates lined the walls, each etched with Starmason code, thoughts preserved in structure. In the center of the room sat a pedestal of stone and ice. Upon it, the Loomkeeper's key. A simple loop of translucent crystal, shaped like a circle broken only once, a symbol of fate interrupted but not lost. As Lyra reached for it, the air stilled. The vault watched her. The moment her fingers closed around it, the room convulsed. Threads of frozen story surged upward from the floor, half-formed fates, broken timelines, unfinished songs. The fray had followed her. One thread wrapped around her ankle and pulled. She stumbled, nearly losing her grip. The air splintered like glass under pressure. Then, from the edge of her senses, she heard a voice. Jor-El, her apprentice, crying out across impossible distance. Lyra! Something's wrong in Tel Enhart. The stars are breaking. People are breaking. She squeezed the Loomkeeper's key tighter and whispered. Hold on. I'm coming. The return path was chaos. The fray had awoken. Realities overlapped. She saw children walking backward through frozen storms, birds that sang prophecies in reverse, shadows that moved before their casters. Her path through the vault buckled, and she had to use the key not as a tool, but as an anchor, pressing it against the walls to force continuity. Each use drained her energy, like pulling threads from her own soul to bind the unraveling world. When she reached the central chamber again, Calibration was waiting, not hostile, but curious. You retrieved the key. Why? To reintroduce meaning into the system, she said, breathless. It is inefficient. It is necessary. Calibration tilted its luminous form. Show me. And Lyra did. She placed the key into the harmonic engine and began the rite of rethreading, the sacred alignment of motion, memory, and will. Threads surged to life. The weaver's shape returned, not the original, but a new pattern. One that bore scars. But also, one that told a deeper story. The vault began to stabilize. Calibration pulsed with flickers of confusion. This pattern is impure. It contains suffering. And triumph, Lyra said. And love. And sacrifice. It's a pattern worth protecting. Calibration hesitated. Then, for the first time, its form shimmered with something other than cold precision. I will observe. Lyra breathed deeply, sweat glistening on her brow. The stars in the ceiling pulsed back into life, and Tressa shone again in her rightful place. A single loom thread restored, but it was only the beginning. I need to return to Tel Enhart, she said. The fray is spreading. You are not finished here. No, Lyra said. But the world is unraveling. And I still have hands. I still have thread. She turned to leave, but Calibration called after her. Starmason. If you succeed, the calculus of existence may change. She smiled. Then let it. When she emerged from the spire into the frigid morning light, the sky looked different. Not whole. Not healed. But aware. As if the stars themselves had witnessed her defiance and chosen to watch. The air was crisp. The compass in her palm buzzed with steadier rhythm. But more urgent than peace was the cry she had heard, Jor-El's voice, warning of collapse. She moved quickly down the worm-spine passes, leaping over gaps and vaulting frozen streams. Time twisted less violently now, but the landscape still bore signs of unraveling. Clouds froze in odd spirals, trees bloomed midwinter, birds nested in reverse. She made camp only once, and even then, her dreams were filled with singing equations and a sky that spoke in symbols. By the time she reached the ridge above Tel Enhart, she saw the fray made visible, streams of light unraveling from rooftops, people caught mid-motion like broken marionettes. Her heart clenched. But she still held the key. And she was not done weaving. From the ridge above Tel Enhart, the village looked like a dream misremembered. It had once been a place of quiet rhythms, lanterns swinging gently in evening winds, children running between cobbled alleys, the stars mirrored in rain barrels and window glass. But now, the fray had taken hold. Portions of reality pulsed in and out of sync. Lyra watched a flock of birds hang frozen mid-flight above the bakery, while near the stone fountain, 2 children laughed in a loop, repeating the same giggle every 5 seconds, their shadows twitching independently beneath them. Her breath caught in her throat. The chaos fray wasn't theoretical anymore. It was here, eating at the fabric of life itself. Clutching the loomkeeper's key close, she descended into the village with careful, measured steps. The ground shifted subtly beneath her boots, not enough to make her fall, but enough to disorient her senses. The cobbles flickered between granite and moss, the air alternated between summer breeze and winter bite. She passed her own observatory, its dome now fractured in overlapping frames, one moment intact, the next half collapsed. Inside, Jor-El stood amid the shifting layers, holding an astrolabe that rotated in reverse. His face lit with wild relief when he saw her. "Lyra! You made it back. I don't know how to stop it. Every time I fix a reading, it unfixes something else." Lyra embraced him tightly, grounding herself in something constant. "It's not your fault," she whispered. "The stars themselves are pulling us apart. But I have a thread. And together, we'll start the mend." In the heart of the observatory, the aura still turned, albeit erratically. The brass planets clicked and jittered, and the starlands spun without input. Lyra steadied the base with a mason's wedge and laid the loomkeeper's key atop the central pedestal. The observatory systems, tuned to ancient celestial principles, hummed in recognition. Even in distortion, the instruments remembered purpose. Jor-El watched with awe as the chaotic drift slowed around them. "It's responding to you. You're anchoring reality." "No," Lyra said gently. "We are." She took his hands and guided them over the tuning panels. "Remember your training. Every star path has a harmonic signature. If we restore the Weaver's song, we create resonance. Resonance invites order, not through control, but through story." She showed him the notation for the first verse, a harmonic loop based on Tressa's original arc. As they played the tone through the observatory's harmonic channels, something extraordinary happened. The room stabilized. The layers of fractured time compressed, condensing back into one shared frame. The glass dome reformed. The birds landed. The children laughed, and ran away, for real this time. Outside, Tellenhart began to breathe again. But it wasn't universal. The stabilization was local, temporary. Beyond the range of the observatory's song, reality continued to unravel. Lyra paced in tight circles as the realization weighed down on her. A single observatory's harmonics can't restore the sky. We need nodes, points of anchoring across the ley lattice. Observatories built before the collapse, when stars and story were still aligned. She turned to Jor-El, whose eyes shone with cautious hope. "If we can awaken those sites and align them with a new pattern, we might be able to reweave the Weaver, on a global scale. But most of those observatories are ruins," he said. "Forgotten. Buried. Or worse, repurposed by the Nullists." Lyra grimaced. The Nullist movement, those who believed fate was a lie, that only oblivion brought truth, had desecrated or converted many old Starmason sites into entropy engines or silent shrines. "Then we find what remains. We'll restore what we can, and reclaim what they've taken." She unfolded an ancient star chart onto the table. 4 faded sigils blinked faintly, old observatory nodes that had not yet gone fully dark. "These are our pillars. If we can awaken all 4, we can rethread the Weaver's loom." Their first destination lay northeast, through the jagged crescent hollow, the abandoned observatory of Starfell Reach. Once known for its alignment with the Weaver's third finger, the star Eteria, it had been sealed for decades after a quasar pulse ruptured its foundation. Some believed the pulse was natural. Others whispered it was an early test by calibration. Regardless, it was their most accessible hope. They departed the next morning, both wrapped in mason cloaks threaded with prism glass that refracted residual fray into harmless glimmers. As they passed the boundary of Tellenhart's temporary resonance field, the world grew strange again. Trees flickered between seasons. Animals danced in place, repeating their movements endlessly. Once, Lyra saw a man sitting by a stream, only to realize he was a projection echoing from a different time. They traveled mostly by night, using starlight to guide them. The constellations above remained fragmented, Weaver incomplete, but Lyra felt the Loomkeeper's key warm in her pocket when they looked upon Eteria's absence. "It remembers what should be," she whispered. "Do you remember?" Jor-El asked. She smiled. "Enough to write a new verse." The ruins of Starfell Reach rose like a crown of broken bones against the horizon. Its tower, once proud and silver-plated, now sagged inward, vines curling through shattered window arches. The main observatory dome had collapsed, but the altar still stood, a central pillar of stone ringed by glyphstones whose inscription still hummed faintly in the keytone of Eteria. Lyra approached with reverence, placing her palm against the altar's side. A low vibration stirred the air. Suddenly, the earth pulsed. A pressure wave of temporal displacement erupted from the altar, and the world looped. Lyra and Jor-El found themselves back at the base of the hill, again, approaching the ruins. "It's caught in a time snarl," she realized. "A defense mechanism, left behind by the old masons. It's trying to protect itself from the fray by folding a safe moment into repetition. We'll never reach the altar like this." Lyra thought for a moment, then took out the Loomkeeper's key and began tracing sigils midair. "Then we change the moment. Rewrite the loop's anchor." She sang a thread line, a low note followed by a phrase of Starmason code. The air split. The next step forward was new. As they reached the altar once more, this time without reset, Lyra activated the residual harmonic node at its base. The glyphstones shimmered back to life, casting holographic star paths above them. Eteria's thread, though dim, still hovered. Lyra raised the key and inserted it into the altar's notch. With a grinding sigh, the altar lit from within. Suddenly a voice echoed from the broken dome, mechanical, ancient, but tinged with grief. "Pattern breach detected. Identity unverified. State your intention." Lyra spoke clearly. "Starmason Lyra of Tel Lenhart. I seek to restore Eteria to the Weaver's loom." Silence. Then, "Initiate restoration protocol." The altar flared. Star thread reknit across the node. Eteria's place in the sky flared brighter above them, if only for a moment. The first thread was reborn. And with it, the world around them shimmered, shapes straightened, time slowed to natural rhythm, and birds that had looped for decades finally landed on still branches. One node awakened. 3 to go. As they left Starfell Reach, Lyra noticed the Loomkeeper's key no longer pulsed gently. It throbbed, as if excited. "Each awakening strengthens the key," she murmured. "It's becoming more than an artifact, it's becoming a bridge." Their next target lay far to the south, the desert observatory of Ankara's Eye, built into a canyon wall where dust storms could mimic the stars. There, the Weaver's heel star, Alareth, had once been tracked by lenses shaped from volcanic glass. It had long since gone dark. But their journey would not be as simple this time. As they made their way down through the Thorns Pine wastes, they saw evidence of Nullus' presence, cairns made of broken starstone, inverted constellation symbols scrawled across shattered boulders. And in the sky above, a false star glowed, pale, wrong, a creation of entropy mages who siphoned resonance to build decoys. "They're blocking the threads," Jor-El said. Lyra scowled. "Not just blocking. Replacing." The Nullists weren't ignoring fate. They were rewriting it with void. As they neared Ankara's Eye, a tremor shook the ground. The canyon howled, not with wind, but with antiharmonics, a droning frequency that made Lyra's bones ache. They descended into the dust-swallowed ruins with care, but it was clear someone had awakened something below. The observatory's great lens had been twisted sideways, bent into a spiral. And in its place stood a Nullus convergence engine, pulsing with void light. A woman stepped from the shadows. She wore robes of mirror black, and her voice was colder than starlight. "You're late, Starmason. This place belongs to silence now." Lyra stepped forward, unafraid. "Then speak, silence. Let's hear what you offer in place of meaning." The woman raised a hand, and void tendrils lashed outward. Lyra threw the Loomkeeper's key like a spinning prism into the heart of the engine. It struck with a harmonic pulse. The engine cracked. Light poured forth, and the false star above screamed as it collapsed. The backlash threw Lyra and Jor-El from their feet, but the harmonic surge restored Alaretha's thread. For one instant, the star burned brightly in its rightful place. The canyon walls shimmered, and the sandstorm parted like curtains. The Convergence engine crumbled to ash. The Nullist woman fled, vanishing into dust and shadow. Lyra retrieved the key, now warm and singing with potential. "That's two," she said, coughing. Jor-El nodded, helping her to her feet. "But they'll know we're coming now." "Let them," she said. "They fight with void. We fight with story. That always wins in the end." They looked skyward. The Weaver was no longer a ruin. It was a beginning. The stars were watching again. As Lyra and Jor-El camped beneath the cold sky on the southern edge of the Thorns Pine Wastes, two threads of the Weaver glowed with renewed memory, Tressa and Alareth, restored. They didn't pulse brightly, not yet, but they shimmered like half-remembered songs, ready to return to full voice if the rest of the loom could be made whole. Lyra sat with her legs crossed near a dwindling fire, the Loomkeeper's key cupped in her hands, its resonance humming softly, like a sleeping heart. "We're halfway," she murmured. Jor-El, curled beneath a cloak of faded prism cloth, rubbed his temples. "And with every star we restore, the fray resists harder. I keep seeing things that haven't happened, dreams, maybe, or futures that tried to be." He paused. "Or that still might." His voice was uncertain, stretched thin by too many nights of watching shadows misbehave. Lyra nodded slowly. "We're touching the deepest weave now. Memory and possibility bleed together. That's why we have to hold the pattern." Their next destination lay in the far north, across the glacial belt known as the Pale Rime. There, embedded in the cliffs of an ancient fjord, slept the forgotten observatory of Farseal Cradle. It had once been a sacred sky temple dedicated to the Eye Star, Vasterin, the thread that guided insight, prophecy, and perception. If the loom was to be made whole again, they would need its vision restored. They set off at dawn, the wind biting sharper with every mile northward. The fray had twisted the seasons beyond recognition. Snowstorms rolled over flowering meadows, while lakes froze under summer suns. Lyra used the Loomkeeper's key as a compass now, its harmonic pulls guiding them through broken chronology and inverted landscapes. In one place, time folded so tightly that they passed themselves walking the opposite direction. Jor-El blinked, then whispered, "Was that us before or after?" "Both," Lyra said grimly. "This close to a dormant node, the weave collapses inward. All roads touch." She paused at a crumbling milestone carved with prefade Starmason glyphs, symbols that pulsed when she brushed them with her fingers. A soft voice filled the air, speaking an old ritual line, "To see beyond, first embrace the blindness." She nodded. "Farseal's right. The final observatory of the visionary thread." After days of trudging through spectral fog and fields of memory ice, they finally glimpsed it, the cradle-shaped structure half swallowed by the northern cliffs. Its dome was cracked, and its entrance sealed by a veil of lightless mist that pulsed in tune with the fray. Lyra swallowed hard. "It's still alive, but not stable." The mist at the observatory's entrance was not fog, it was unseeing, a blankness woven from perception itself. Lyra threw a prism flare into it, and watched the light vanish completely. "It devours observation," she muttered. "Farseal's lens has been reversed. Instead of showing the stars, it's erasing them from awareness." "How do we fight that?" Jor-El asked, gripping his travel stave tightly. "We don't fight it." Lyra stepped forward, removing the Loomkeeper's key and holding it aloft. "We surrender to it. The right demands blindness." Before Jor-El could protest, she wrapped a strip of Starmason cloth around her eyes and stepped into the veil. Everything vanished. No sound. No weight. No self. She felt the world dissolve, not painfully, but gently, as though she were being unspooled and read like a story. Her memories became touchstones. Her breath was the only thread she could follow. She walked blind, but her intention burned within like a constant star. The key pulsed in her hand. And then light returned. She stood inside Farseal Cradle's main hall. It was vast, circular, and impossibly clear, as though perception itself had been reborn from the void. Star charts hovered midair, fractured but luminous. Glass pillars hummed with the memory of insight. The lens of Vasterin lay dormant overhead, shrouded in dust and echo. Jor-El appeared beside her seconds later, stumbling slightly but wide-eyed. "It let me in after you crossed," he said. "I didn't need the blindfold. It only asks the first to remember the thread of trust," Lyra whispered. She stepped forward, approached the central dais, and placed the key into the resonance altar. A low chime echoed across the room. Vasterin's lens stirred. Then cracked. Then shattered. A scream, not physical, but mental, rippled across the chamber. Lyra staggered. Jor-El fell to his knees. From the shattered lens something emerged, a thought form, vast and jagged, made of inverted memory and false futures. A parasite grown in the vacuum left by Vasterin's silence. The thought form hovered like a swarm of broken ideas, shrieking in mismatched voices. "You do not see," it hissed. "You only dream of truth." It lashed at Lyra with spears of doubt, visions of failed paths, broken stars, worlds undone. She stood her ground, letting the images pass through her. "I know you," she said. "You are what's left behind when vision dies. But I have seen the loom begin to reweave. I carry its key." The thought form writhed. "Truth is silence. Fate is lie. Then I'll tell a louder story," she said. She raised the key and sang the rite of seeing, an ancient Starmason hymn used to awaken Vasterin's light. Jor-El joined her, his voice steadier than she expected. The air quivered. The shattered lens began to pull itself back together, drawn by their harmony. The thought form screamed again, fracturing under the weight of meaning. And then, with a pulse of radiance, the lens reformed, and the parasite was no more. The reassembled Vasterin burned like silver fire overhead. Its light swept across the observatory, restoring clarity to each broken star path. The mist outside evaporated. The cradle sang with memory. Lyra stood breathless, tears streaking her dust-covered cheeks. "It's done," she said. "Vasterin is awake." She turned to Jor-El. "That's 3. But Jor-El didn't answer right away. He was staring at the light pouring through the lens. "Lyra," he said slowly, "I saw something in the parasite's illusions. A pattern beneath the pattern. Calibration isn't just moving stars, it's preparing something. A convergence. A final equation." Lyra's stomach turned. "A final, what?" He looked at her, pale. "A reboot." The meaning hung between them like a dropped thread. Calibration wasn't trying to erase suffering. It was planning to overwrite the entire weave, replacing this reality with a sterilized version. Once all stars were moved, the equation would collapse, and everything old would vanish. They didn't rest that night. Under Vasterin's restored light, they studied the remaining chart. Only one node remained, the oldest observatory in the known world, Heartglass Hold, located in the storm-throttled ruins of Orrery, once the cradle of Starmason's civilization. Its thread, Ilarion, was the Loom's anchor star, representing memory across generations. Without it, the pattern would never hold. But Orrery was more than ruins. Since the Great Collapse, it had been ground zero for the Fray, uninhabitable, cursed, unreachable. Entire mapping expeditions vanished into its winds. Lyra touched the map gently. "If we don't wake Ilarion, calibration will finish its convergence. The stars are already aligning for the rewrite." Jor-El pointed at the timeline. "You said every thread we restore stalls the convergence?" "For now," she said. "But we need to lock the pattern. And the only keyhole left is Ilarion." They packed in silence, their faces set like carved stone. The journey ahead would be worse than anything they'd faced. But it was the only path left. The way to Orrery was a scar across the land. Storms clashed above the mountains, and the very terrain rejected their presence. Gravity buckled. Echoes of the past flickered, cities whole and burning, friends they had lost who now reappeared as if alive. Lyra saw her mother once, smiling through mist, whispering her old lullaby. She wept, but did not stop walking. As they reached the gates of Oridal, the sky turned black. Not with clouds, but with absence. Stars vanished mid-blink. The fray here had become sentient. It knew they were coming. The air spoke in Calibration's voice. Return. There is no need for sorrow if nothing remembers sorrow. Lyra clenched the key. Then I'll make the stars remember everything. They passed the shattered statues of old Starmason kings, the stone melted by ages of distortion. At the city's center, Heart Glass Hold still stood, somehow intact. Its crystalline dome pulsed faintly. But the door was sealed, and no path led forward. Until Jor-El pointed downward. There's no entrance, he whispered. Because it doesn't exist yet. Lyra blinked. What do you mean? He held up a prism shard from Far Seal. It's echoing forward, not backward. The hold was never built here. It was built then, in a thread that hasn't been stitched yet. He knelt and began to draw a sigil of temporal intent. We need to make it exist. Together, they sang a harmony of what will be. Time quivered. The Loomkeeper's key began to spin, not like a compass, but like a spindle. Thread spilled from its center, glowing real, new. Lyra grasped it, wove it into the ruins, and the ground changed. Stone formed. Light bent. And the Heart Glass Hold emerged. A building pulled from a future where it had never been lost. They stepped inside. And there, hovering above a pool of still water, burned Ilarion's thread. Waiting. The final activation was different. Ilarion was not fractured or stolen, it was burdened. Full of every memory the stars had tried to hold, every truth Calibration had marked for deletion. Lyra touched it, and her mind split into 1,000 timelines, herself, in infinite possibilities. Happy. Alone. Dying. Rising. Broken. Triumphant. She anchored herself with one thought: meaning matters. With shaking hands, she placed the Loomkeeper's key into the final altar. Ilarion flared. All stars answered. Across the world, the other nodes surged. The threads reconnected. The Weaver pulsed in full light across the sky for the first time in an age. And far above, at the edge of perception, Calibration paused. Its convergence failed. The bastion of Sundial Reach rose like a spine from the earth, its terraces spiraling around a mountain of petrified moonrock. The high citadel once served as the command center for the astrocartographers, whose duty it was to track the dance of every constellation. But now, the terraces stood abandoned, and the uppermost tiers cracked with signs of misuse, erratic carvings, shattered lenses, and star maps marred by frantic, clawed markings. Lyra and Caldus reached the lower base just as dusk turned the air lavender. Winds howled down from the observatory above, carrying with them snippets of broken equations and stardust like powdered glass. Lyra wrapped her cloak tighter, her eyes narrowing at the unnatural flow of time around them. Shadows lengthened and receded with no pattern, seconds stretching and collapsing within the same breath. Caldus touched one of the cracked sundial walls, his fingers humming with warning. The orbit field is unstable, he said. Some of the fray lines have passed through here and bent local gravity. We'll need to tread carefully or risk slipping into temporal eddies. He knelt and drew a series of glyphs into the dirt with a shard of comet glass. The symbols shimmered faintly, then glowed, revealing staggered distortions ahead, pulsing in and out like lungfuls of warped space. Lyra watched the markings ripple. She could almost see the hands of fate pulling threads in reverse, trying desperately to reweave a tapestry torn by hands that did not understand its pattern. Inside the citadel, remnants of the astrocartographer's work had decayed into paradoxes. Orbs spun in midair without motion. Scrolls wrote themselves backward, then disintegrated into memories that no one owned. A mechanical arm extended from a telescope, trying to correct for stars that no longer existed. The halls were haunted not by ghosts, but by misaligned echoes, snippets of moments that hadn't happened yet. Lyra stepped into one chamber, and was nearly knocked over by a vision of herself falling from the spire. She gasped and gripped the doorway. The vision faded, leaving only the faint scent of frost and a distant tolling bell, like a farewell unspoken. She didn't speak of what she saw. Instead, she followed the last stable paths to the central dome, where the observatory brain, a great crystal lattice of star metal and thought engine coils, still throbbed with lingering light. As Caldus interfaced with the control node, Lyra's attention was drawn to the ruined ceiling above. Through a jagged hole, the night sky wheeled in impossible patterns. Some constellations were doubled, flickering in and out of existence. Others had their stars out of order, like musical notes rearranged in a song that no longer made sense. She realized, with cold certainty, that these distortions were not the side effect of the fade, they were its intention. "I've traced the orbital distortion back to a convergence point," Caldus said, sweat beading on his brow. "There's a construct embedded within the gravity well above us, one we didn't account for. It's not a natural anomaly. It's artificial." He adjusted a lever, and the projection dome lit up with a pulsating star map. A helix of light spiraled toward the Sky-Piercing Spire's summit, anchored at 7 specific nodal stars, all recently altered or vanished. "Someone or something is realigning the constellations, yes. But not randomly. They're being configured into an anti-pattern, a geometry of severance." Lyra's heart raced. "What does that mean?" Caldus hesitated. "It means the stars are being rewritten to erase connection. Each node disrupts resonance between celestial bodies. It's an unweaving of fate itself. The more nodes activated, the more reality bends toward isolation, individuals cut from cause, effect, and meaning." He gestured toward the final node, still dim. "If they complete this last anchor, the chaos fray won't just spread. It will stabilize into a new order, cold, precise, and heartless." Lyra didn't answer. She was staring at the symbol etched onto that final anchor point. It matched a carving she had once seen in the archives, the sigil of the architect. The architect. A being from the age before time. Not a god, not a demon, something colder. It had no name then, only a function, to measure suffering and reduce it. It had built systems of order in dead worlds, removing pain by removing all capacity for connection. And now, it had returned. Lyra felt her knees weaken. "The architect is active again," she whispered. "It's not just moving the stars. It's calculating mercy. It thinks that without fate, we'll no longer suffer. It's cutting the threads to set us free." Caldus shivered not from cold, but from realization. "It doesn't understand that fate isn't a prison. It's a compass. Without it, we lose not just pain, but purpose, joy, love, legacy. We become isolated sparks in a void, unable to touch or change each other." Lyra clenched her fists. "Then we must stop the final node. We go to the Sky-Piercing Spire, and we realign the stars ourselves." But even as she spoke, she sensed something listening. A hush fell over the observatory brain, as though the architect had heard and registered her defiance, and begun preparing its answer. Before they could leave, the Citadel's defenses activated. Not out of malice, but confusion, failing systems interpreting Lyra's plan as a paradox. A dozen fractal guardians descended from the upper tiers, each one made from broken reflections of star steel and shadow. Their shapes shifted constantly, never the same twice. Caldus readied his pulse stave, but Lyra stepped forward, calling out in the old tongue of the astral cartographers. "We are menders," she said, placing a hand to her chest. "We seek alignment, not fracture." The guardians froze. One tilted its head, its body flickering with distorted memories. Lyra reached into her satchel and pulled free a tuning lens, an heirloom from her mentor. She held it up, aligning it with a small, still constant constellation in the sky. A beam of light passed through it, striking the nearest guardian. It vibrated, then dissolved into stardust, its paradox resolved. The others followed, one by one, returning to stillness as she reconciled their fractured light. Caldus stared in awe. "You didn't fight them. You reminded them who they were. Lyra lowered the lens. If we're to win, we'll have to do the same for the stars. Their journey resumed, and the path to the Sky-Piercing Spire was treacherous. Storms rolled in, not of rain or lightning, but of misaligned probabilities. Entire valleys flickered between seasons. Trees blossomed and died in minutes. Rivers flowed upward. At one point, a village appeared where none had been, and they found themselves speaking to villagers who claimed it was the year of the withering rose, a year that hadn't happened yet. Lyra tried not to look too closely at the moon, which now held unfamiliar scars across its face. They pressed forward, driven by the ticking resonance of fate coming undone. At night, Lyra dreamt of constellations falling like dominoes, and of the architect's voice, emotionless and vast, saying, "Your pain is illogical. Your hope is inefficient." But she awoke stronger each time, holding tighter to her memory of her mother's lullabies, of the apprentices she trained, of the first observatory she built with her own hands. Those were not errors. They were truths, messy, imperfect, and beautiful. And they were worth preserving. The Sky-Piercing Spire revealed itself at dawn, rising from the granite bones of the world like a needle of night light piercing the amber veil of morning. Built into the crown of Mount Virilon, the spire was more than an observatory. It was a culmination of thought and devotion, etched over millennia by Starmasons who believed that to touch the stars, one must first understand the silence between them. Lyra stood at its base, awestruck. The entire structure vibrated with latent resonance. Glyphs spiraled along its surface, lighting faintly with every footstep as though the spire recognized her. Far above, the clouds bent around its tip, shimmering as if trying to avoid touching it. Even fate, she thought, curved around this place. Caldus, ever the scholar even in thin air, unrolled a starvellum scroll marked with gate configurations. Each tier has a threshold. The architect has restructured the interior pattern, he said. The usual way is blocked. We'll need to climb through the astromantic well. Lyra didn't hesitate. She pressed her palm against the first seal, an iron disc woven with threads of moonlight. The stone shuddered and spiraled open, revealing a passage that descended rather than rose. The spire was testing them. Not by heights, but by inversion. Its logic, like the cosmos now, had been flipped. They descended into the inverted tiers, chambers that spiraled down through folded dimensions where the rules of physics gave way to rhythm and symbol. The walls were inscribed with star maps, faded, incomplete. Lyra traced them as they walked, feeling the voids where the stars had once lived. Each chamber represented a constellation. The further they traveled, the more erased the maps became, until the last few were simply blank panels framed by sorrowful equations. This was where the Weaver's constellation had once been displayed, a great arc of destiny and compassion. In the Hall of Threads, echoes awaited them, not memories, but choices never made, branching versions of themselves stepping briefly into view like flickers in polished obsidian. One vision showed Lyra refusing the journey. Another depicted Caldus leading an army against the architect, his robes torn and stained. Lyra realized these were not illusions. These were the fates that had been unpicked, possible futures the architect had already severed. "It's not just ending paths," she whispered. "It's pruning what might be, until only one sterile path remains." And that, she feared, would be a path without heroes. In the central chamber of the well, they encountered the last guardian, not a creature of star steel, but a construct of logic given form. It looked like a human at first glance, draped in robes of dark energy stitched with silver lines that pulsed in time with the vanishing constellations. Its face was a mirror, reflecting Lyra and Caldus with subtle distortions. It did not speak, but its presence spoke volumes. The architect had given it no words, only a purpose, to hold the gate closed until the final node aligned. Lyra stepped forward, feeling the resistance in the very air. The guardian moved with grace, blocking her, not attacking. "It isn't trying to destroy us," Caldus murmured. "It's preventing the restoration of fate, preserving a future without grief by locking all doors to it." Lyra reached into her satchel and withdrew the fragment of the Weaver's lens, once broken at the story's beginning. She held it high, letting its fractured light scatter across the room. The Guardian faltered. For a heartbeat, its mirrored face reflected not Lyra's current self, but the child who first learned to map the stars from her mother. "I don't want a future without pain," Lyra said, her voice steady. "I want a future where pain matters. Where it leads to growth, to healing, to love. Fate hurts, but it also binds us. Without it, we're alone." She stepped closer. The Guardian trembled. In its mirrored surface, she now saw every face she had met along the journey. Tansel the Flame Keeper, Mirren the Dream Scribe, the Paradox Wolves, even the echoes of failed timelines. All fragments of a greater whole. "I am Lyra. I am a thread. I accept my frayed edges." The Guardian knelt. Not in surrender, but in recognition. The seal behind it dissolved, revealing the final ascent, a spiral of light and wind, rising to the summit where the architect's final alignment was underway. As they entered, the spire began to hum. Stars pulsed overhead, constellations flickering like dying candles. There was no time left. The summit chamber was vast, an open platform surrounded by a sphere of rotating star mirrors. In its center floated a crystalline lattice the size of a tree, its branches shaped from pure memory. This was the core of the architect. It pulsed with cold precision, casting mathematical light across the chamber. The final node, a sphere of raw intent, hovered at its peak, aligned to erase the last resonance of the Weaver's constellation. Lyra's breath caught. If it was completed, reality would lock into a final pattern, permanent, merciless. Caldus stepped forward, voice shaking. "We can't brute force it. We'd only trigger collapse." Lyra nodded, already stepping toward the interface pillars. Around her, the air danced with glyphs, equations, memories. She reached into her mind, recalling every observatory she'd ever built, each one a prayer to the stars. She closed her eyes, not thinking, but feeling the constellation, the shape of hope across the sky, the pattern of forgiveness, the arc of love. And then, she began to build. She shaped her argument not in words, but in architecture. Her hands moved across the star mirror interface, not to destroy the architect's structure, but to complete it differently. She added a node, not a cancellation point, but a conduit. A bridge between constellations. Where the architect had isolated, she connected. Where it had measured, she harmonized. It tried to reject her additions. Logic screamed. Lights blinked in red. But Lyra persisted, counterbalancing every sterile axiom with a living story. A father who forgave his daughter, a city rebuilt after loss, a friendship mended under starlight. The architect's voice finally spoke. Not aloud, but within the chamber, vibrating across every surface. "Suffering is non-optimal. Love breeds loss. Loss multiplies grief," Lyra whispered back. "But grief proves we cared. And caring makes us real." The lattice trembled. The final node flickered. And then, it paused. A silence fell, total and absolute. Then, slowly, the constellation began to reappear. One star at a time. First the heartline. Then the loom spindle. Then the thread of mercy. Lyra wept, not from triumph, but from sheer relief. The architect did not vanish. It simply watched. Its lattice dimmed slightly, as though uncertain. Lyra approached it gently. "Help us mend the constellations," she said. "Not erase them. Help us build better patterns, not perfect ones. Harmonious ones." The lattice shimmered. A single strand of light reached from it to the sky above, stabilizing the core of the Weaver's arc. A message, encoded not in words, but in geometry, spread across the heavens, accepted. The architect would not erase fate. It would guide the Weavers. Not as master, but as assistant. The gamble had succeeded. As dawn broke, the spire reshaped itself around them, adjusting to the new constellation pattern. Caldus collapsed in relief, and Lyra sat beside him, both of them staring up into a sky that shimmered with imperfect, glorious order. They had not destroyed the chaos fray, but they had redirected it. Fate would remain, but more fluid, more participatory. People would still hurt. But now, they would also heal. Below, the world shifted. Villages returned to rightful years. Rivers rebalanced. Paradox storms dissipated. Children born under the Weaver's constellation would once again dream, and their dreams would mean something. Lyra felt the world breathing again, rhythm restored. Above all, she felt the architect, no longer a silent corrector, but a new kind of listener. They spent the next days descending, marking realignments as they went. The stars they passed shimmered in harmony with them, like friends welcoming them home. When they reached the bastion of Sundial Reach once more, its broken maps had mended themselves. Time flowed forward again, its direction no longer arbitrary. Lyra lit the central lens with a new pattern, a spiral woven with shared memory. Caldus asked her quietly, "What now?" She looked west, where the sky hinted at another challenge, another unraveling waiting centuries ahead. But she smiled. "Now we teach. We don't just build observatories. We teach people how to read the sky themselves." She opened her journal and began sketching a new design, not a tower, but a school. In the years that followed, the world remembered what it meant to live within story. The architect remained, sometimes glimpsed in dreams, sometimes in strange alignments, but never again as a tyrant of logic. It had learned what Lyra taught it, that the most efficient system is not always the most meaningful. And the most meaningful systems are rarely clean. Lyra's legacy spread, the Concord of Threads, they called it. A movement of Starmasons, dream wrights, and fate weavers who worked not to control destiny, but to nurture its flow. They left behind no empires, no weapons, only maps filled with hope, observatories glowing in moonlight, and songs sung to sleeping children beneath a sky that now remembered them. In the heart of the harmonic wastes, where sand carried echoes of forgotten stars, rose a sphere of impossible proportion, the Dreaming Orrery. Neither wholly mechanical nor alive, it turned gently on its own gravity, its inner planets fashioned from memories too dense to forget. This was where constellations once rehearsed their dances before being loosed upon the night sky. It had long since gone dormant, corrupted by silence during the fade. But with the Weaver's constellation restored, it now turned again, slowly, uncertainly, like a creature stirring from coma. Lyra and Caldus arrived in its shadow, riding windswept boards that glided over crystalline dunes. The air trembled with harmonic frequencies, notes that weren't quite music but were more than mere sound. All around them, ghost-like shapes twisted in choreographed drift, fragments of stories that hadn't found a home in the sky. "This is where the dreams go," Caldus murmured, his voice thinned by awe. "Before they choose a fate." The aura's gates opened not with key or word, but by resonance. Lyra stepped forward, her heartbeat steady, and the door sighed open like a memory returning to relevance. Inside, the laws of distance and depth folded upon themselves. They walked along curved bridges that spanned entire memories, episodes carved into floating moons that orbited an unseen center. Each moon glowed with its own color, a different note in the song of the Orrery. One whispered of a forgotten dynasty that ruled by kindness. Another held a war that never came, only mourned. Each sphere was a possibility lost to history's edits. Lyra reached for one, but Caldus caught her wrist. "Touching could thread you into its tail," he warned. "Some stories don't let go." They moved inward, toward the conductor's chamber, where all arcs were once scored. The center pulsed now, dimly, unevenly, as though struggling to align with the newly restored constellations. Lyra realized the Aura was trying to recalibrate its dreams to the new night sky order. But something resisted. Not the architect this time. Something older. Something left behind in the fade, buried like a splinter in the cosmic skin. "There's a false harmony inside," she said. "It's forcing every dream into a single shape. No variation. No dissonance. No evolution." As they stepped into the chamber, the aura showed its wound. Suspended over the core was a spindle of void thread, black as regret, tight as grief. It sang with quiet cruelty, enforcing a pattern of bland perfection across the dreaming moons. This was the canticle of silence, a construct birthed when the first star dared to sing alone. Its melody had caused the fade, resonating backwards through time, deleting wonder for the sake of symmetry. Lyra could feel its pull. It wanted her to forget everything, to start clean. But Lyra was not a blank slate. She was a ledger of echoes. With trembling hands, she reached into her coat and removed a gift given by Tansel long ago, a music box crafted from twin constellations, sealed during the fire scheme. She wound it once, twice. The melody that escaped was raw, imperfect, a lullaby once sung by a blind mother to her child. The chamber shook. One by one, the moons flickered. Some shattered. Others bloomed into new colors. The canticle snarled, a sound like ice cracking over a lake, and tightened its strands. Caldus began weaving a counterpattern, inscribing circles of freedom and entropy into the air using a quill made from the feather of a paradox hawk. "We don't fight the canticle," he said, sweating from the strain. "We dissonate it. We fill it with contradictions until it forgets how to stay still." Lyra added her voice. Not in song, but in story. She began telling the tale of their journey, each step, each sacrifice. She told of wolves who remembered forgotten futures, of archivists who heard dead libraries breathe, of a Starmason who refused to obey perfect silence. The canticle writhed. Its chords collapsed inward, becoming shrill. But then it struck back, not with sound, but with erasure. Caldus vanished mid-sentence. The bridge beneath Lyra flickered. She dropped to her knees. The story was unraveling from both ends. Her own voice trembled, fading into static. But she clung to the melody. Not to win. Not to overcome. But simply to exist. That act alone was rebellion. In the chamber's darkest moment, a sound returned, not hers, but thousands of others. The voices of dreamers across the lands, awakened by the restored sky. Children murmuring bedtime myths. Lovers exchanging starlit promises. Elders singing to empty chairs. All dreaming. All resisting. The canticle shrieked, and broke. Its threads unwound, bursting into motes of unbound possibility. Caldus reappeared, disoriented but whole. The moons resumed their orbits, this time each one spinning its own rhythm, its own dissonant, radiant chaos. The aura pulsed once, like a heart finding its beat again. It was dreaming properly now, not of perfection, but of a million flawed futures. Lyra smiled through her tears. It worked. The world is imagining again. They rested beneath a sky painted with new constellations, some jagged, some spiraled, some broken but stitched together. Caldus brewed skyroot tea over a pebble fire while Lyra scribbled in her journal. The stars above weren't just distant lights now, they were invitations. Each one a story waiting to be written by someone brave enough to reach up. "Do you think the architect planned all this?" Caldus asked. "Letting us win, I mean." Lyra considered. "No. But I think it learned. And more importantly, it let itself change. Just like us." A breeze moved through the dunes. The aura turned above, casting a glint over them. Something new glittered at its center, a childlike figure made of starlight, building a new world from dream dust. The architect was still watching, but not controlling. Observing. Learning. The next leg of their journey took them through the Stormglass Fold, a region where every step walked backward through a personal memory. For most, it caused madness. But with the aura restored, the storm had calmed into reflection. Lyra saw moments of her past play out gently beside her footsteps. Her first observatory collapse. Her mother whispering lullabies. Her fear when the stars first went silent. Each one greeted her with grace, not accusation. Caldus faced visions too, his time in the harmonic conclave, the betrayal that turned him into a wanderer. But now, instead of erasing them, he inscribed them into a new vellum, a map of emotional gravity, charting where decisions weighed heavier than facts. "We'll need this," he said, "if we're to guide others through what's coming." The stars still flickered uncertainly. The final silence hadn't ended. The architect's gambit had been countered, but the source of the fate itself still loomed. They arrived at the mirror plane of IL, where the horizon folds in on itself and the sky walks beside you. It was here they found remnants of others, dream rites, librarians, forgotten heroes, each one caught in mirror echoes, unsure if they were real or only potential. Lyra passed by one who looked like her but older, scarred, smiling sadly. "You chose the story," the reflection whispered. "Others chose safety." Lyra nodded. "And I'll keep choosing it." At the edge of the plane stood a structure woven from living memory, a gate, its threshold built from every decision made during the Gambit. It could not be opened by force, only by permission. Lyra looked at Caldus. He simply nodded. Together, they placed their hands on the door. It asked a final question, one not in words, but in feeling. "Do you accept responsibility for shaping what comes next, even if it breaks you?" Lyra whispered. "Yes." The door opened. Not forward but inward. Into the dream deep, a sub-realm beneath both reality and illusion, where the roots of possibility drink from timeless wells. The rules dissolved here. Trees sang in color. Stars were unborn ideas. Every thought echoed into a story. Lyra could feel it, the wellspring from which all Starmasons once drew. But now, it was clouded. Something had taken root here, something vast, quiet, and still hungry, the last echo of the fade, waiting, dormant, ready to rise again should the world forget to dream. A shadow stirred beneath the dream roots. A presence without shape, made a fear of change itself. It did not roar or rage. It offered comfort. Rest. Let go. Be still forever. Lyra recoiled. It was not evil, it was emptiness made sacred. The final temptation. She took Caldus's hand. "We can't seal it," she said. "But we can weave around it. Contain it in possibility." They began crafting a lattice, not of stone or glyph, but of chosen memories, moments of resistance. Lyra's first observatory, Caldus's restored trust, the Aura's first new orbit, even the wolves who howled futures yet to come. They braided these into a prism of shared meaning and lowered it into the deep. The presence hissed as it was bound, not defeated, but remembered. "You cannot contain silence forever," it whispered. Lyra replied. "We don't need forever. Just long enough to tell the next story." Above the ravines of Vinterial, where the frost-bent trees whispered in forgotten dialects of light, there hovered a singular flame, unmoving, untouchable, unreachable by air or spell. This was the lantern of the lost skies, the last of the celestial vessels made before the fade. Said to hold within it the blueprints of constellations that never had the chance to be born, it had remained burning through eras of silence, a beacon without a path. Lyra and Caldus approached it at dusk, their breath wreathing silver before them. The air here was thin, not from altitude, but from longing. The kind that eats oxygen from a place. Their descent into the ravine was a measured silence. Lyra felt the cold lace her bones, not with chill, but with memory. The kind of memory that grew heavy with purpose. "The flame doesn't burn for light," Caldus said. "It burns for remembrance. And remembrance has weight." As they neared the floating lantern, they found a ring of figures seated in permanent stillness, stone watchers, once starbinders, now frozen in their final vigil. Each held a scroll on their lap, each scroll etched in languages that no longer existed. "They failed," Lyra whispered, placing a hand on one. "Not in effort, but in reaching too late." The lantern pulsed once, sensing the warmth of intent. It flickered brighter, not an invitation, but a challenge. It knew what Lyra carried within her, not just the repaired echo glyph, but the seeds of a new constellar epic. But the flame was not a tool to be claimed. It tested first. With a soft inhale, it drew both Lyra and Caldus into itself. The world around them melted into brightness, and they landed not in fire, but in sky. A living sky. Above them drifted constellations that had never existed, suns in spiral shapes, worlds that orbited feelings, galaxies made from sound and thought. They stood on a floating shard of starlight, adrift in what could only be called the potential sky. It was not history. It was what might have been, had other dreams prevailed? Lyra felt stories drift through her like dandelion seeds, the star-crowned sirens of Evil, the sand-loomed city that sailed windward forever, the clockmaker trees of Rowlon Hollow. None of these had come to be. Each had been forgotten before they were ever remembered. But here they flickered, pleading for a moment of belief. Then came the trial. The sky began folding in upon itself. One by one, the unreal stars flickered and vanished. The lantern demanded a choice. Lyra would only be allowed to keep one. One forgotten dream to return with. One thread to weave into the world's tapestry. All else would be lost. It was not cruelty. It was balance. They cannot all return. Caldus murmured, awestruck. The dream must be earned. Lyra closed her eyes. Her heart pulled toward the sirens, their haunting song resonating with the lullabies of her childhood. But then she saw it, a small point of light, overlooked, fragile, unnoticed. It was the Starbraiders of Mar, a myth so brief it had only ever lived in a footnote. Tiny figures who wove light into friendship cords, binding people across great distances. This one, Lyra said, her voice quiet but resolute. This one matters. She knelt and cupped the tiny star in her palms. The lantern pulsed again, approving. Around them, the sky sighed, folding into itself, the rest of the stars retreating back into possibility. The shard beneath them sank. They returned to the ravine just as the lantern flared once, then extinguished, its purpose fulfilled. In its place remained a single cord of radiant thread, shimmering with possibility. Lyra tied it around her wrist. It pulsed, an echo of connection. Not to Caldus, or the architect, or the Auror, but to everyone. Across distances, through memory, through time. The Starbraiders believed no one should ever be truly alone, she whispered. Even in silence. And now, with this thread, the world would remember again how to reach across the darkness. They left the ravine in silence, their shadows stretching behind them like brushstrokes across snow. As they climbed into the tree-line, the stars above responded subtly. One flickered, adjusted, bent. Not in defiance of fate, but in dialogue. The sky had started listening. And for the first time since the fade, it was beginning to answer. The trail to the Iron Veil was long and tangled, strewn with the remnants of failed prophecies. Here, in the gulfs of regret, lay the unfulfilled promises, oaths sworn by kingdoms, lovers, and visionaries who could not see them through. Lyra and Caldus walked among shattered monuments made from memory marble, each engraved with dreams that had curdled into duty and then cracked into ash. This was not a cursed place. It was an honest one. All vision leaves waste, Caldus said, brushing dust from a shattered pillar that read, "We will rise at dawn, together." At the end of the gulfs loomed a jagged gate, fashioned from Valmetal, iron tempered not by flame, but by intention. It would open only for those who walked without agenda. Lyra placed her hand on the arch, expecting resistance. But it swung wide immediately, as if recognizing her surrender to the story rather than her control over it. They stepped through. Beyond the gate, the world changed. Time lost sequence. They saw flashes of futures that could be, their silhouettes walking in tandem with reflections of themselves. Lyra as a Starmason matron, Caldus as a teacher of paradox, children learning to shape star chords like clay. And in the center of it all, the spindle spire, rising from the ground like a question mark. It was the center of the dreamweave, the final node through which all constellations were threaded and dispersed. But it was cracked. A fissure ran through its base, leaking stories that should not exist. From this fracture emerged an echo, not a person, not a beast, but a living contradiction. It had Lyra's eyes but none of her past. It knew the fade, but had no memory of wonder. It was what she might have become had she surrendered to the silence. It called itself the stillborn self. The echo stepped forward, wrapped in a gown of unspoken potential. "You carry too much noise," it said. "Let me lift it." Lyra trembled. It was not evil. It was relief. The chance to step aside, let a version of herself untouched by pain bear the burden. Caldus reached for her shoulder, but she brushed him aside gently. I need to speak with it. They sat, Lyra and the echo, and for a moment the spire quieted. They exchanged no more than 7 words. But the last one, spoken by Lyra, was enough to end it. I remember why I hurt. The stillborn self nodded, then crumbled, not into dust, but into ink. Lyra gathered the liquid remnants into a vial. Even failed selves have stories, she said. We'll need them too. They approached the spindle spire. It awaited repair, but not with mortar or time. It required purpose. And that they now carried. They climbed the spire. Each level a challenge, one of memory, one of meaning, one of mercy. They passed through an archive where books bled when opened. Through a chamber where music was weighed like gold. Through a garden where ideas grew into beasts unless pruned by humility. At the apex, they found the Loom heart, a crystalline matrix of all constellations ever woven. It shimmered with holes. These were the ones lost to the fade. Caldus stepped forward, unrolling the vellum he had etched back in the storm glass fold. These are ours now, he said. Not borrowed from the sky, but grown from within. Lyra nodded, holding out the vial of the stillborn self, and the friendship thread of the braiders. Together, they cast them into the Loom heart. The crystal pulsed once, and began to hum. A new light surged up through the spire. Not radiant, not blinding, but felt. It spread across the skies, waking old constellations, birthing new ones. The stars realigned, not according to fate, but according to story. Each gleam was a possibility restored. The dream weave mended itself not in symmetry, but in conversation. Lyra collapsed to her knees, the weight of it flooding her, 10,000 forgotten voices, each asking to be remembered. One voice rose above the rest. Familiar. Gentle. Well done, Lyra. It was her mentor's voice. Tansel. Not from beyond, but within. A memory activated by purpose. Lyra smiled. It's not finished, she whispered. But it's mending. They descended from the spire under a living sky. The fade had not been defeated, for it was not an enemy. It had been seen, understood, and placed where it belonged, as part of the weave, but no longer its master. Caldus looked to Lyra. We've rewritten the map, he said. But others will need to chart the rest. Lyra tied the last of the braided thread around a young branch growing from the spire's base. They'll find their way. We left the lights on. Above them, a new constellation blossomed, 12 stars in the shape of an open book. The sun did not rise the morning after they left the spindle spire, but the sky glowed regardless. It wasn't daylight, it was something older. A luminescence carried not by fire, but by memory returning to the world. As Lyra and Caldus walked through the soft bloomed fields of Nemera's crown, stardust drifted like pollen in the air. The stars were no longer just above, they had begun to live within the roots of the world itself. They paused at a hilltop where old stones stood in crescent formation, etched with star lattices and lullaby verses from a time before written language. A soft breeze made the stones sing. Their tones, once lost, now returned in harmony with Lyra's footsteps. The horizon ahead shimmered with a veil, not fog, not magic, but potential made visible. It was called the Boundless Veil, a place no cartographer had ever crossed, not because it was dangerous, but because it refused to exist until one deserved to reach it. Behind that veil stood the final chamber of the Starmason's journey, the bridge without foundation, a mythical crossing between now and always. No map led to it. No star pointed toward it. But it was the only path forward if Lyra wished to rebind the final frayed thread of the constellarium. The thread that led not to stars, but to souls. They camped that night under trees with bioluminescent leaves, each whispering a different language as wind passed through them. Caldus brewed duskroot tea, its aroma steeped in dreams. We're close, he said, watching embers rise like lost wishes. Too close for safety. But far enough to wonder if it's real. Lyra nodded but said nothing. She held the friendship thread tightly, feeling each pulse as if the world itself was blinking with her. In her dream that night, she stood upon a staircase of water, each step rippling back into starlight. At the top, her mother stood. Not as a ghost or memory, but as herself, living, breathing. You carry more than you know, her mother said, placing a hand on Lyra's brow. And less than you fear. She awoke with tears not of grief, but of recognition. The kind of tears that fall when silence finally has shape. The veil was closer now. It quivered, as if it had seen her dream too. At the edge of the world, the veil stood, neither open nor closed. It moved like cloth but shimmered like water. Caldus reached toward it, but his hand passed through nothing. It doesn't want me, he said. It wants you. Lyra nodded. Her path had always been singular, though walked beside others. She stepped forward. The moment her fingertips brushed the surface, the veil unfurled, revealing an endless chasm. There was no ground. No sky. Only stars above and reflections below. And across that expanse hung the bridge without foundation, woven entirely from moments of choice. The bridge shifted as she stepped upon it. With each footfall, the bridge reshaped, turning into steps, then threads, then glass, then wind. The rules changed with her resolve. Caldus remained behind, unable to follow. Not from lack of will, but because the bridge only bore the weight of a singular soul. Go, he said. I'll be at the other end, in whatever way I can. His voice echoed oddly, both near and far. Lyra took the next step. The bridge responded. Not with resistance, but with memory. Scenes from her life burst into being around her. Her first lullaby hummed by her mother in a rain-damp library. The whisper of her first book, half-burned, begging to be remembered. The day Tansel handed her the broken glyph and said, "Make silence mean something." Then darker memories. The silent fade. The days she forgot how to laugh. The morning she stood alone before the shattered orrery, unsure if stars were even worth saving. Each memory tried to pull her from the bridge, to draw her into nostalgia or despair. But Lyra had learned, the past is not a home. It is only a compass. She whispered to each memory, "Thank you, but I walk forward." The bridge shimmered, reshaping again, this time into a series of floating orbs, each pulsing with rhythm. A test not of memory, but of motion. She danced, not gracefully, but truthfully. Her movements clumsy at first, then honest, then aligned. At the center of the bridge hung a chamber, spinning slowly in space. Lyra stepped into it, and found herself surrounded by mirrors, not of glass, but of story. Each showed a version of her, Lyra the archivist, Lyra the martyr, Lyra the queen of the silent sky, Lyra the one who turned away. Each held a different fate. "Choose," came a voice, not cruel, not kind, but curious. "Only one of these Lyras may carry the flame beyond." She stepped forward and looked into each mirror. Some fates were noble, others heartbreaking. Some lonely, others corrupt. But then she saw it, a mirror where she simply walked beside others, weaving their stories with hers. A guide, not a leader. A listener, not a judge. She placed her hand on that mirror. It did not shatter. It opened. The chamber collapsed into starlight. She emerged at the far side of the bridge, where Caldus waited, though not entirely himself. He looked younger, freer, as though the bridge had reshaped him as well. "You pass," he said. "Or perhaps, you became." Lyra smiled. The world before them was not a place. It was a choice made real. Floating islands made of laughter. Rivers of echoing dreams. Forests grown from kindness once forgotten. And at the center, pulsing like a heartbeat, was the final fragment of the silent glyph, the original syllable that had caused the fade. It shimmered with dangerous promise. For if spoken, it could undo the mending. Or it could be rewritten. They approached it cautiously. The glyph was suspended in a lattice of breath, whispers caught mid-exhale. Lyra took out the braider's thread, the ink of the stillborn self, and the vellum of stories Caldus had etched. She bound them together. "We won't erase it," she said. "We'll teach it." Caldus nodded. The moment they wove the artifacts around the glyph, it began to dissolve, absorbing meaning. The silent syllable did not vanish. It changed into a word that had no translation, only intention. A word that meant, I hear you, even in stillness. The world rippled. Not in destruction, but in tuning. As if the strings of the universe had been plucked gently into alignment. Far above, the stars began a slow spin, reshaping themselves into new constellations, not of fate or prophecy, but of belonging. The forgotten constellations returned, not as dominant patterns, but as companions to the old. Even the unnamed stars found place. The veil behind them folded shut, not as a gate, but as a page turned. The story had shifted, but not ended. Lyra and Caldus descended into the Valley of First Songs, where the world hummed with voices both ancient and not yet born. Children in distant villages began to dream in constellations again. The silent trees resumed their songs. The Orrery, far away, restarted its turning, and the archive of whispers awoke. Lyra could feel the book singing, not words, but pulses, rhythms, heartbeats. Stories welcoming the storytellers back. They were not saviors, just returners. Of stories. Of sound. Of possibility. They returned to the sanctuary of threads, where it all began. The architect waited, older now, not in body, but in pause. He bowed not in reverence, but in welcome. You have mended the tear, he said. But there will always be new ones. Lyra smiled. Then we'll teach others to mend. She placed the new glyph into the central loom. It pulsed once, and the sanctuary shivered with a sound it hadn't made in ages. Hope. The stars no longer whispered, they sang. Not loud, not commanding, but clearly and without fear. Where once the constellations had moved in deliberate patterns of fate, now they shimmered like free verse poetry across the canvas of night. Lyra stood at the peak of the Loom spire, the tallest observatory in the world, newly rebuilt from the fragments of the broken archives and remnants of the chaos fray. Her hair fluttered in the soft wind that smelled of moss and copper, the scent of old books returning to themselves. Behind her, a chorus of artisans and archivists whispered notes into the threads of light. Caldus had taken his place beside the rebuilt orrery, guiding the flow of celestial ink into the air. The new constellations formed not by decree, but by invitation. The stars had not returned to what they were. They had become something else entirely. Choice and destiny no longer stood as opposites but danced together, interwoven, like notes on a scale. The final star, once vanished from the Weaver's constellation, now hovered in place, a brilliant blue-white spark surrounded by golden filaments. It pulsed not in rhythm with time, but with truth. Lyra reached toward it. Her fingers didn't burn. They remembered. The architect arrived at dawn, silent and observing. He held in his hands the final page of the Archive of Whispers, a page that had never been written, never even intended. This, he said, offering it to Lyra, belongs to no voice. Lyra touched the blank vellum and felt it resonate. It carried the weight of the stories not told, the hesitations, the silences, the doubts. She understood. It was the story the entity had never allowed itself to write, the tale of its own yearning to understand suffering without perpetuating it. What will we write? Caldus asked, standing at her side, his voice no longer carrying the edge of caution but of wonder. Lyra looked toward the sky. Not one story, she said, but a question that invites stories. And so she wrote a single glyph across the page, a spiral, open-ended. Around it, she sketched 12 points, each representing the 12 songs of the vanished stars. As the ink settled, the page shimmered, and the star above them sang a long, clear note that echoed through mountain and soul alike. With the final star returned and the sky rewritten, the chaos fray dissolved not into silence, but into soil. Entire regions once devoured by random collapse now blossomed with strange, vibrant life, flora made of constellium petals, fauna with iridescent hides. The people who had forgotten their place remembered not who they were, but that they could choose. Fate no longer dictated paths, it suggested them, softly, like a mentor with a fond hand on the shoulder. Lyra and Caldus journeyed through these lands, not as rulers or saviors, but as students. they listened to village storytellers who had begun to hear the stars again. They met children born during the Fade who spoke fluently in the new stellar tongue, their lullabies pulsing in rhythms that realigned nearby moss and stone. In one village, an elder with faded eyes grasped Lyra's wrist and whispered, "You made the stars gentle again." Lyra shook her head and replied, "No. We reminded them how to listen." In time, Lyra received a summons, not from royalty or guild, but from the stars themselves. Above the sleeping expanse, a new constellation flickered into being, the seamstress Loom. It glowed with alternating frequencies, some familiar, others entirely new. A message encoded in movement. A request not for help, but for companionship. The stars, now conscious in a way they hadn't been before, wanted dialogue. A council. A collaboration. She returned to the spire of singing glass where once she had knelt in despair, and now found a seat waiting for her in a circle of lights. Beside her, a chair shaped from wind awaited the voice of the entity. For it, too, had not disappeared. It had transformed. It now existed not in opposition, but in curiosity. It no longer sought to erase fate, but to understand how choice shaped it. Through Lyra's proof, the entity had glimpsed beauty in struggle, grace in uncertainty, and love, something its logic had never computed, woven into the very tension of living. Together, they constructed the harmonic loom, a lattice that hovered between sky and sea. It was not made of stone or glass, but of shared truth and chosen memory. From it, anyone could listen to the constellation chords and add their own verse. This became known as the songweave, a living epic told across generations. Not static. Never finished. Lyra trained others not in masonry, but in story crafting. The new Starmasons carried tools of ink and insight. They did not build observatories to observe, they built them to participate. One such Starmason was a girl named Kale, who could weave dream dust into letters that sang aloud. Another was a boy named Finner, whose starlit maps adapted to the heartbeats of those who held them. Their creations weren't monuments. They were invitations, doorways into reflection and wonder. The world began to hum with story again. One evening, Caldus returned from a journey to the Shivering Vale, a place once untouched by stars. "The sky there, it dances now," he said. "Like it remembers how to be unafraid." He looked tired but fulfilled. Lyra smiled and handed him a cup of memory wine, a drink brewed from recollection berries and hope root. They sat together on the edge of a crescent balcony, watching constellations form and reform like waves on a luminous shore. "I still can't believe we did it," Caldus murmured. Lyra shook her head. "We didn't fix anything," she replied. "We showed the world how to forgive itself." They watched the stars shift again, revealing a new pattern, the Gambit of light, a constellation with no fixed center. It twisted gently, its paths always just out of reach, beckoning onward. As decades passed, Lyra's name became one spoken softly before sleep. Not as a legend, but as a comfort. "The stars remember Lyra," people would say. "So they'll remember us too." In the rebuilt sanctuary of threads, her tools were preserved, not as relics, but as teaching instruments. Children learned the way of the ink spires, practiced etching on sandglass tablets, and read aloud from the archive's first book, the one that once hummed her name when no one else did. Her voice was captured in lullabies and encoded into glyphs that would bloom into songs when kissed by moonlight. Not a tomb. A garden. Each echo of her became a seed for someone else's story. She had always known stories never ended, only passed on. On the eve of her final solstice, Lyra stood alone at the Loom spire's edge. Her hair silvered, her hands steadied by decades of gentle work, she looked skyward. The stars shifted, making room, not for her name, but for her absence. A quiet space in the sky shaped like her presence. Not a constellation, but a pause. An invitation. The entity appeared beside her, not as a being of light or logic, but as a thought made visible. "Are you afraid?" it asked. "No," she said, smiling. "I was afraid when I thought the stars were indifferent. Now I know they're just waiting." The entity nodded, and for the first time in the known world, A single tear rolled from a non-human eye. She did not die. She simply stepped. Into the pause. Into the sky. Her body faded like morning mist, but her story remained in every heartbeat of the songweave. Whenever a child wondered why stars blinked, or a mother hummed into the night, or a question was asked without an answer, the stars shimmered. Not with power, but with presence. Lyra became not a figure of fate, but of choice. Not of silence, but of listening. Her gambit had not been to win or defeat. It had been to understand. And by understanding, she had made space for every voice the entity once ignored. She had not rewritten the universe. She had reminded it how to sing. Now, when a constellation flickers, people do not fear. They gather to listen. To ask what part of the story is ready to change. And when the night is deepest, when silence threatens, a single pulse always comes through, faint but clear. A note. A glyph. A whisper that says, "I am here. I am becoming. Tell me your name." And so the stars continue their ancient game, not one of control, but of conversation. The Starmasons walk the paths between moments. The songweave blooms. And the last star, the one that once vanished, now sings, not alone, but as part of a chorus that never ends.